Hi everyone, hi YouTube family, welcome back to another video. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are new here, then you are welcome, and if you are a returning subscriber, then as always, welcome back to the channel. On this channel I speak faith, I speak relationships, and I speak lifestyle, and in today's video we are going to be speaking relationships. So guys, I love talking about relationships. It's been a long time since I've spoken about relationships on this channel, but I'm excited for us to just delve into a topic today as I kind of just talk about some of the things you need to know when it comes to entering into a godly relationship. Things you need to know before entering into a godly relationship. So we're going to be talking about that today. So many people say that they want a godly relationship. So many people say that they want to enter into a godly relationship, but the truth is that so many people do not want to do it God's way. They want the godly relationship, but they don't want to do it the way that God has said that we should do it. Many have tried it their own way. Many have tried it culture's way. Many have tried it the world's way, or even maybe the way that you have seen growing up, but you have just seen that time and time again it hasn't worked, and you are ready to break that cycle. You are ready to break that pattern, and you are at that point now where you're like, I am ready for a healthy, flourishing, fruitful, godly relationship that will lead to a godly marriage. So if that's you, then this video will definitely bless you as I share some of these biblical points on the things that you should think about before entering into a godly relationship. So let's get right into the first point. The first thing that you need to think about before entering into a godly relationship, and that is that it's important for you to think about and discern whether you are ready for that godly relationship that you are seeking God for. Many of us say we want the godly relationship, but the truth is that either we're still in that process of being prepared, or maybe we are still in that place where, again, we're saying that we want the relationship, we're saying we want the godly relationship, but we're not ready, we're not willing to do it God's way. Or it might even be a case where, like I said, we're trying to do it without God. So I wanted to kind of just touch upon that point in terms of just the fact that sometimes we're just not prepared, and that's okay. Sometimes we're still in that process, and that's okay. Sometimes we're still on that journey, and that is okay. But the most important thing here with this point is being able to discern where you are, being able to discern the season where you are, and to discern whether it's the season for you to wait and work on yourself and build your relationship with God, or whether it's the season for you to, yes, step out and go into that godly relationship. Many times God gives us warning signs. Many times God gives us red flags when it comes to some of these relationships that he's saying that, no, this one is not for you, my child. This one is not for you to go into. But very often what tends to happen is that people ignore those warning signs. People ignore those red flags until the point where they basically see the consequence of that decision. And the interesting thing is that people usually won't tell you that they saw these warning signs, these red flags, until the relationship fails, until the relationship does not happen. But may we be a generation who, rather than waiting until the actual result or the failed relationship comes, that we are able to discern when God is saying that, no, child, this is not it. When God is saying that you're not yet ready, when God is saying that this is not the time, may we be a generation that is able to discern that, so that we will know the season we are in and the things that we should be doing in that season. So I just want to share with us a little bit of a case study. We're going to be using case studies for each of our points today, and the first case study we're going to be using is in relation to a group of people who basically went before God's representative, the prophet of God, and asked God to give them a king. And if you're familiar with the story that I'm talking about, yes, I am speaking of the children of Israel in the book of 1 Samuel chapter 8, where they basically asked God for a king. The children of Israel, first of all, they didn't even need a king because God was their king, but they had failed to recognize that. They had failed to recognize that they already had a king. They had failed to recognize that the relationship that they had with God was the first and most important relationship that they needed at that time before even bowing down to a man. And I think that's the first point that I want us to draw from on this section, in terms of the fact that sometimes we fail to realize that before the relationship, before the romantic relationship, before the godly relationship is a relationship with God. Where are you right now with your relationship with God? Are you at a place where you can confidently say that you have a relationship with God? That is not just religion. It's not just you doing the things that you are supposed to do to tick a box, but that you genuinely have a relationship with God, and you understand that even before the godly relationship, that this relationship is the most important relationship. this is one thing that the children of Israel failed to recognize. They failed to recognize that they already had a king, and they started to demand for a king. Now, it's interesting because God actually said to Samuel, who was the representative, the prophet at the time, and said to him, give them what they want. And that is such a scary place to be. I pray that God will not get to a point where we are praying, asking for that godly relationship, and he just says, okay, give them what they want. Because essentially, this is what he did with the children of Israel. They were asking for a king. And God said to Samuel, okay, it's fine, give them what they want. But before that, tell them the warning signs. Tell them the type of things that this king will do. Tell them the way that things will be for them when they have this king ruling over them. Let them know. And Samuel told them the warning signs. He told them the red flags. He told them the things that was going to happen, how things would be. Yet they still said that they wanted a king over them, someone to rule over them, someone to judge them. And why was this? Because they said that the surrounding nations around them had a king, and they wanted to be like those nations. And this is what we do sometimes when we look around us and we're like, God, but everyone around me is in a relationship. Everyone around me is in a relationship. It might not even be a godly relationship, but just the fact that we see that so many people around us are in relationships then sometimes makes us to say that, God, give me that God relationship now. I want it now. I want it now. And like I said, in the instance of the Israelites, God said, give them what they want. And later on, they saw the consequences of them having that king over them, which wasn't good. So that's our first point. We have to be so careful with idolatry, like idolizing a godly relationship or idolizing marriage, because when we idolize these things, then it then becomes a point whereby when we get that thing, we then forget God in the process. We put that thing before God, and that is so dangerous. I once heard this saying, which, oh my gosh, it's still stuck in my head, and I'm just like, wow, crazy. But a woman of God basically once said that she heard another woman of God say that the reward for idolatry is a narcissistic relationship. When people are in idolatry, when people idolize these things, then they basically just end up with a narcissistic person. They end up with somebody who is broken. They end up with someone who will not treat them right. And I wouldn't say that King Saul was narcissistic, but they ended up with somebody who basically wasn't after God's own heart, and was someone who was basically selfish to the point where he put his needs before their own needs, and that wasn't good for them. So that's the first point. Make sure that you're able to discern when you are not ready for that godly relationship and the things that you need to do to prepare, and make sure that your relationship with God comes first, is number one, before you basically go into that godly relationship. Otherwise, there will be an imbalance. You're likely to idolize that relationship, and the end result of relationships like that just ends up being disastrous. So the second point that I want to touch upon, the second thing that you need to look to, is that very often our choice is not the best choice, but God's choice is always the best. And I think this is something as well that's important for me to highlight, because so often our choices are skewed by, our past hurts, our pains, our traumas, our upbringing, things that are familiar. Sometimes we base our choices, our decisions on the people that we should go with based upon those things that I've just mentioned. And what we don't realize is that what then happens a lot of the times when it's based upon that, rather than us consulting with God to see whether he approves of this choice, is that we basically see that cycle and that pattern over and over again, where it just feels like you're just getting with the same person but in another body. So the same characteristics, the same traits, the same dysfunctions, just over and over again. So this is why, again, it's so important for us to think about this point in terms of in the past. I want you to just have a think really quickly and just ask yourself that, do you actually consult God before you get into your relationships? Or is it a thing where you get into the relationship and then you consult God to see whether God is saying that this is the one? Because let's just be honest, for so many people, they first get into it and then they're trying to seek God, but already their emotions are in it, already their heart is in it, and it's hard to let go at that point. So we look at that outer appearance, and the thing is that first impressions a lot of the time is not the correct definition of who a person truly is, because it takes time to discern the things that are on the inside of a person, to see the character traits, to see the qualities that they have, the abilities that they have. That's not something that you will just see the first time that you meet somebody, but very often we base our choice based upon just what we see on the exterior, on the outside. So we see this person, tall, dark, handsome. We see them driving the latest car. They've got their own house. They have an amazing job. These things are good, yes, but then in that process, sometimes we don't look at the internal things. We don't take time to look at the character of the person. We don't take time to look at their abilities, to think that, okay, if this person was to become my spouse or the father of my children or the mother of my children, would they have the qualities to match up? Is this a person who has the heart of someone who basically loves, correctly, the heart of someone who is after God's own heart rather than just their own selfish ambition? So back to our case study. So as we know, like I mentioned, they got a king, they got what they wanted, God gave it to them, and it basically ended up being a thing where this king that was given to them just wasn't after God's own heart. He kept on disobeying God to the point that God just said, I'm done with him, like I reject him. And he basically said he's going to appoint somebody else to be king over the children of Israel. So in 1 Samuel chapter 16, we now see basically Samuel going to appoint this new king. And Samuel goes to the house of Jesse and basically sees all his sons lined up. And he sees the firstborn son, Eliab, and he says, surely this is the Lord's anointed. Surely this is the one. And how many of you guys have been in that place as well, where you've seen the person, maybe the first time you've met them, or maybe you've just seen them based on their outer appearance, and you're saying in your heart that surely this is God's choice for me. Surely this is the one. Surely this is the Lord's anointed. But you haven't taken that time to actually go and consult God on whether this is actually what he wants for you or not. So thank God that Samuel could hear from God. Because if Samuel couldn't hear from God, Samuel literally would have anointed the wrong person and put the crown on the wrong person's head. So I'm going to just quickly read that part for you guys, which is 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 6 to 7. And it says, when they arrived, Samuel took a look at Eliab and thought, surely this is the Lord's anointed. But the Lord said to Samuel, don't judge by his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord doesn't see things the way you see them. People judge by outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. And that just goes back to the point that I was mentioning, that we actually need God to help us when it comes to us making that choice. Because the truth is that we see what is on the outside, but God sees the heart. Building upon the previous point that I made in terms of the importance of the relationship with God before the godly relationship, another thing that is important, or another thing that you need to think about, is the fact that you need to question that, do you actually hear from God? Like, do you hear from God? Because the first time that you want to hear from God shouldn't be the time where you're trying to seek him to know whether somebody is for you or whether somebody is someone that you should enter into a relationship with. Do you have a track record with God of hearing from him on other matters in your life? Or are you going to God for the first time just to seek him, just to hear if this person is the one, to hear if this person is the one that you should enter into that relationship with or even marry? So that's another key point as well that I wanted to touch upon in terms of the importance of being able to hear from God. Having a relationship with God where you hear from God, so that when you are coming to that point of making those choices, you're not just making it based upon what you think or what's wise in your own eyes, but that you're actually able to seek God and be confident that you can hear God to tell you that, yes, this is the one. Or like he said to Samuel in this instance, that no, this is not him. I have rejected him. So that's another key point as well in terms of our choice. Sometimes, honestly, our choices, we think that, yes, because it's the desires of our heart, that it must be the right choice. Maybe God put that desire there. But the truth is that sometimes that desire is based upon familiarity. What we're familiar with growing up, especially if that familiarity is based upon dysfunction. So we have to be so careful with our choices and ensure that we basically take it to God so that we can seek him to get his view on the matter before we actually go into that godly relationship. And the third and the final thing that you need to think about when it comes to this area or this point of before you go into a godly relationship is that you need to heal before you deal. You need to heal before you deal, because so many people are going into relationships and they haven't yet healed from the previous relationship. They go into the relationship, it fails. They go into another relationship, it fails. And then they start questioning why they keep attracting the same kind of person again and again. Like I said, in a different body, but sometimes it's just the fact that they haven't yet healed and they are attracting based upon the trauma, the brokenness, the pain that they are still carrying. So our case study for this one is going to be our guy, Samson. So for those familiar with the story of Samson, whenever we hear of Samson, many times we think about Samson and Delilah. But what many people don't realize is that before Delilah, there was a heartbreak. Before Delilah, there was even two other women that we basically read about that Samson connected himself to. So I'm just going to go over the first woman that we see Samson connect himself to. And this is in the book of Judges. He sees this woman and he basically says to his parents that I want this woman. But the thing is that this woman that Samson wanted to get with was a Philistine. And that was basically the enemy of the people of Israel. That was basically who Samson was called on assignment, on a mission to defeat. But then he ended up marrying one of them. So Samson marries this woman, and basically this woman betrays Samson. So the same way that we see Delilah basically betray Samson by giving information to the enemies, we see the exact same thing with this woman who was Samson's wife. And it says she nagged him day and day and day until he got to a point where he was tormented with her nagging and basically gave up the secret that he was keeping at the time from the enemies. So it's interesting to me because we see that pattern. That same cycle happened with Delilah. But before Delilah, again, like I said, there was a heartbreak. There was somebody else. Now, after that happened, Samson went home, back to live with his parents, and his wife was given to his best man. The man who was best man at his wedding. And then later on, she was killed by the Philistines. So I don't know about you guys, but that just sounds so traumatic. That just sounds like trauma. And I just feel like after that point, if Samson had maybe taken that time to heal, then maybe he wouldn't have gotten with a woman like Delilah. So I'm just going to share with you guys, just to end, 4 things using the acronym or using the word heal and the acronym with that word to just share different ways that we can heal basically before we deal, so that we don't continue those cycles, continue those patterns, and just continue attracting the wrong people, but that we will be healed, so that when that godly relationship does come, that we are ready and that we are whole enough to enter into that relationship. So the first letter in that word heal that we're going to use is H for heart surgery. So many of us need to basically go through that period in our life where we basically take that time for our heart to be healed. Everyone has gone through something. There's no one in this world that can say that they've never gone through anything that has affected their heart in one way or another. Everyone needs to come to that point where they are able to just sit with God and allow him to basically work on their heart and do heart surgery to heal their heart from those previous pains before they come into the next relationship. So many people think that getting to the next relationship will be the thing that will heal them from the previous relationship. But I think we've seen enough evidence to let us know that that is obviously not true, and that what is needed is that period to heal before even entering into that next relationship. So heart surgery is the first one, taking that time to just take our heart to God, to heal our heart from the brokenness, from the pain, from the trauma before entering into the godly relationship. E is for emotional healing. So this is another one that I'm quite passionate about, and I've spoken a few times about on the channel, and I made a whole video on this, so I'm just gonna kind of just link you to that video just to kind of check it out, have a watch, have a listen, because I really feel like it will help you on this point. And it basically talks about how you can prioritize your emotional health in this season. So that's another one in terms of us literally taking that time to prioritize our emotional health, to come out of emotional immaturity to emotional maturity. And I really feel like if Samson had spent that time to really just get emotional healing, then maybe he wouldn't have kind of leaked that secret to Delilah. I guess we would never know. But that's another one that is so important to think about when it comes to healing before dealing, taking that time to receive emotional healing. The third one, which is A, is abstinence. Now this is a big one, and I think this needs a whole video on its own. But when I talk about abstinence, here I'm talking about abstaining from sex. So abstaining from sexual relations before obviously getting into a marriage. So when it comes to obviously Samson, although the Bible doesn't actually say to us that he slept with Delilah, it's quite clear that it seems like they were cohabiting together, living together, and you know, it's likely that sex was in the works. So one thing that is often obviously said is that sex outside of marriage clouds one's judgment. And I think this is an important one to touch upon when it comes to this point of healing before dealing, because if one continues in that kind of pattern and cycle, then it's very easy for basically one not to be able to get to that point of actually healing before they deal. And there's just so much to talk about on this topic. Like I said, it's a video for another day, but kind of just connecting oneself to different people basically makes it harder to come to that place of being able to enter into that godly relationship, because you're basically carrying a lot of baggage, a lot of things that come with that lack of abstinence. And then the final one that I'm going to touch upon is L, which is love. Now, we all love love, we all love talking about love. That's something that we all love to talk about, right? But I think a lot of the time, and many of us don't actually understand what it actually means or what it actually looks like. So many people basically kind of confuse lust and love. So many times they think that they actually are in love, but what it actually is lust. And I think it's so important for us to be able to differentiate between the two, be able to understand what love is from a godly perspective, unconditional love. So many people have grown up in an environment whereby they have been taught that love is based upon conditions. So if you do this right, I will love you. If you don't do this, then I will withdraw my love from you. But before entering into that godly relationship, it's so important to understand unconditional love, a love that is not based upon conditions. And I was recently listening to a podcast, Dear Future Wifey podcast, and Gary Chapman was on there. For those not familiar with Gary Chapman, he's the man that wrote the book, The 5 Love Languages. So I definitely recommend that book to you guys. I'll put the podcast episode below as well for you guys to check out, to just really understand the 5 love languages, to understand how you receive love, and to understand the importance of understanding your partner's love language so that you can serve them better. So that's all for today. Those are the points. It's been quite a lot, but I'm just going to end it here. I hope that what I've spoken about has given you some things to just think about, some things to start off with when it comes to you just kind of waiting, preparing, believing God for that godly relationship, that as you wait, that you will start to think about these things, work on these things, and not rush into the next one before first taking that time to reflect from the last one. So yeah, there's just so much more that I can kind of talk about on this topic. So if any of these points stood out to you, then do make sure you comment below on what stood out to you, what was your biggest takeaway, and also if there's anything else that you want me to kind of delve into deeper, then do let me know and I will make sure that I do a video on that. So thank you once again for watching. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Until then, and as always, peace out and God bless.